Hello everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this presentation idea on the exciting CALGreen overview with Cove Tool. Please use the QR code here in the left top corner of this screen if you need to get more information or if you had any question regarding that. Uh, so um, let's start. I'm not sure if you can see my screen right now. Okay, yes. All right. Before we dive into the detail, let me introduce our team of presentation today. My name is Farnaz Jahandide, and I am the decarbonization lead at Cove Tool. Joining me today is Esteban Oropeza, our energy modeling consultant. Together, we bring both of experience in sustainability and engineering, and we are excited to share our insight with you. So, if you're here to increase your general CalGreen code knowledge and know a little bit more about green building, you're in the right place. So, let, let's get started. Okay. We will start with an overview of CalGreen's purpose and the mandatory green building measures. Then we will dive into Tier 1 and Tier 2 options for those interested in advanced sustainability practices. And next, we will overview tool and best practice for compliance documentation to make the process more manageable. And finally, we will open the floor for Q&A to address any questions or challenges. And by the end, you will have a clear understanding of CalGreen requirements and practical steps for compliance in your project. As an introduction, in general, CalGreen is here to help build better buildings. CalGreen is going to help you to meet code, but it is also helps you to build your building that's in a way which is healthier for the occupants. It saves some energy typically, and it helps you to have fewer callbacks from your clients. So essentially, the purpose of CalGreen is to provide a baseline green building code, but while the bar has been raised to improve outcomes, the requirements have been designed truthfully so builders are not overwhelmed and can feasibly meet these new standards. There are two voluntary tiers, as I mentioned, that are a little bit higher than baseline CalGreen. So today we are going to mostly focus on mandatory measures, which all the projects are going to require those. But we will touch a little bit of voluntary measures, and we will also be talking about best practices for reviewing and submitting documentation. All right. In terms of where CalGreen came from, it was back in the 70s that the state of California adopted the California Energy Code, and it is known as Title 24. In the late 90s and early 2000, the LEED certification came around, and there was a lot of confusion about what makes something green. Is it just having solar panels or non-toxic materials, etc.? So LEED ended up linked of creating this framework, and then in 2009, CalGreen came on the scene. It was totally voluntary at first and then has become mandatory over each cycle. And thankfully for all of us that had been in the lead world for a long time, CalGreen really follows the same structure in terms of priority and organizations. Here we need to say that the new CalGreen are all about electric vehicles. There's also a huge focus on embodied carbon, so we will spend some time on discussing embodied carbon as well. All right. Just as a reminder, the Title 24, as the building officials always like to remind us of, is a whole building code. And so we are focusing today on Part 11, the California Green Building. A standards code, not and not to be confused with the Part 6, which is the energy code, although you will see some cross-referencing over there. Okay, so here is just an overview of the chapters within CALGreen, which we are going to focus on chapter 4 and chapter 5, which are the residential and non-residential mandatory measures, and then we will touch on the voluntary measures at the end. In terms of a scope itself, there's chapter 4, which is residential, and chapter 5 is non residential. Also, chapter 3 tells you about the scope between these two and what triggers CalGreen in the first place. All right, so in the residential, basically all new residential construction needs to follow CalGreen, or if you are doing alternation and addition that adds area or volume, just the new parts need to follow CALGreen, and it doesn't trigger retrofitting. So, for example, old plumbing fixtures will have to be upgraded, but that's not part of the CALGreen, just part of the California Water Code. Also, in the non-residential side, there's all new constructions, but the addition needs to be over 1,000 square feet, or alternation over $200,000 in permit valuations. So, if you are doing a small non-residential, they are not going to follow up. Also, parking lot alternations and additions are part of Calgary scope. Okay. There's a couple of little things to look out for if you have a mixed occupancy, like if you have that residential above and, for example, commercial below, you need end up to have two Calgary checklists, one for residential and one for non-residential. For phase buildings, it just applies to whatever party is in the scope. So a shell building might just have whatever components are for that, but maybe it doesn't have plumbing. But then for the tenant improvement, we will need to comply with CALGreen. All right. Okay. So the question is, how do we show compliance? We have an Excel sheet with all those code, and then in the way that we can reference the notes. But a lot of folks are using the sheets that are provided by the AIA. It's only useful if you follow the notes. So there's like a yes or no applicable and not applicable, and then a reference. So you can just put the sheet on the actually your project, and then like putting the code on your plans, but not incorporate it into the drawings itself. So for whichever one, if you, for example, for instance, it's for outdoor irrigation, then you would show where on the landscape plan that actual compliance shows. Okay, so here we're going to go ahead and jump into the mandatory measures for chapter 4 and 5. As we mentioned, chapter 4 is all residential and 5 is non-residential, but they parallel each other in some parts. So as we go through these, when they are on the same page and topic, we will address them together. Please note the very first section under planning and design is an option for the embodied carbon for addition and alternation, but we will talk about it in the section of embodied carbon separately by the end of this presentation. All right, so here I would ask Esteban to jump in and continue the discussion over the presentation. Thank you, Esteban.
Sure. Let's dive very quickly into some of the minimum requirements. Of course, we're not going to get too deep into some of them, and we're going to make more emphasis on the ones we have more expertise. But just as a refresher, grading and paving is one of the first ones. So basically, stormwater pollution prevention during construction is applicable in in different categories depending on the area. So for smaller construction sites, less than an acre, uh, you need to implement a stormwater pollution prevention plan during construction. But if the site is larger than that, then you would fall into national pollution discharge elimination system. For yeah, sorry, for getting on paving, it's also about dealing with the slope of the site. So we both want to have a water slope that leads the water away from the building, uh, and at the same time, the requirements are moving towards capturing stormwater in ways that would match the natural hydrology. For bicycle parking, this is applicable just to non-residential building types. So there are two types in the short term, which is for guests, and it could just be a regular bike rack, but it needs to be within 200 feet of the entrance, and it's in a ratio of how many parking spaces you have. So if you have a big open lot and it's for employees and guests, then you need to make sense on a call on how many of those are applicable to guests and how many of those are applicable to employees. For other requirements, this is not the case. This is just a metric specific to parking numbers. So that's that. And for long-term bike parking, for security, uh, you need to have lockers outside of rooms. Public schools and community colleges, it's important to note, may have slightly different requirements. And now we go to electric vehicle charging. This is a significantly important addition to, to a building code that's implemented by CALGreen. So there are basically three types of EV infrastructure. The first is EV capable. That would be the lowest threshold, and it's basically uh, providing empty conduit that goes from the panel to where you might have a charging stage in the future. So you can really use the charging, but it's also not a waste because you're just providing the provisions for that in the future. Then the second level would be EV ready. EV ready is a space that is fully wired, and it may have a, or not a receptacle, but it doesn't require the charging equipment itself. So ready, it's ready for equipment, but it's not actually charging any vehicle. And the third category is of course having the chargers in place, uh, usable chargers. So uh, in the requirements, you will see that the the EV installation types are referred as to level 2. There are three types, generally speaking, in for EV chargers, uh, from 1 to 3, depending on how long does it take for the charger to get your full battery in your car. So the CALGreen refers strictly to level 2. That's like the minimum level that is required. Uh, the level 3 chargers could be provided but are not required. And Another important note is that all EV parking, regardless of the level you are implementing, needs to be labeled. So if you're just going with EV capable, you at least should have all your panel boards adequately labeled, so that in the future your EV installer comes and can easily identify the electrical provision there. But you don't need to label the spaces if the chargers are not yet provided. So that would only happen if you already installed the chargers. Then you need to correctly label those to implement the use policy. Yeah. So another thing is new single family is the lowest bar, and all you must do is EV capable. Uh, so just leaving the installations for someone to do it in the future. For multi-family hotels and motels, we do have EV capable and EV ready requirements. So 40% of all the parking spaces need to be low power level 2 EV charging receptacles, and 10% need to be level 2 chargers. And going to the non-residential building types, at least one level 2 supply equipment shall be provided. So, if, for example, your project is a community where people are going to have fast chargers, you can sub out and you can do a level 2. Or if you have one DC fast charger, it can be substituted for 5 level 2 chargers. And in the same way, if you require 8 level 2 chargers, you can do one of the, let's say, Tesla types, and the other 3 as level 2. So you can really play with the level of chargers you are installing depending on what's required. For non-residential buildings like warehouses and grocery stores, there's a requirement to have capacity for EV capable type for trucks. That's also a thing to have in mind. And public schools and community colleges have very similar requirements to non-residential buildings. The documentation for EVs and the calculations are uh, on the cover sheet for the number and type of spaces, and then the site plans need to be labeled with all the details, showing the capacity in the panels, and in which also must be shown in your electrical sheets. So that's just documentation wise. Energy efficiency. As we mentioned before, this session is it's not focused on energy, because this basically refers to a different part of the Title 24. That's Part 6, but there are no additional requirements beside that. You just need to stick to that Title 24 Part 6 Energy Code. The chapter divisions. We are now on water efficiency and conservation. So there are requirements for fixtures and fittings, but they're pretty straightforward. We have here this table showing the allowed flush and flow rates in gallons per minute, or gallons per flush, or gallons per cycle, depending on the equipment that we're talking about. And an important thing to pay attention here is like if we have fixtures with water sense labels, like toilets or shower heads, uh, these are usually a good selection. Another thing we want to make note is for residential bathrooms that have a maximum of 1.2 gallons per minute, um, but they are the only fixture with a minimum rate of one of zero point 0.8 gallons per minute. Uh, sorry, uh, that's that's the limit there for those type of fixtures. There are also requirements for pre-rinse spray bulbs, which are part of the new code additions, and these as well must have flow rates lower than 1 GPM, which are regulated under Title 20, but they're they're taken from there and now included in the CALGreen. Other measures to be mindful of are submetering, related to water submetering. So based on this chart, you can see if that's required depending on the project and use types. So for non-residential new projects or additions over 50,000 square feet, you need a submeter if you must use over 100 gallons a day, and if it's less than that 50,000 square meters, you don't need to submeter unless the use is considered excessive, and excessive consumption is a use of 1,000 gallons per day. This could be something like a building with multiple tenants. If there's use like a restaurant, then you probably need submeters. And for multifamily, all units must be submetered according to the plumbing design. Food waste disposers also have a gallons per minute maximum threshold, and they must be less than 1 gallon per minute when not in use, or have an automatic shut-off after 10 minutes, and less than 8 gallons per minute when in use. So all this needs to be included in the plumbing fixture schedule for documentation sake. Outdoor For outdoor water landscaping, you will use the model water efficient landscape ordinance. So this is a tool for looking out outdoor water usage for landscape over 500 square feet. You'll need a table like this one. In the bottom left, there's a calculation for the maximum applied water allowance, giving the number of gallons of water you're allowed to use annually based on your project's location and the landscape area. And then you will need to compare that to the proposed usage, which is based on the plant type and irrigation efficiency. And this as well should be provided explicitly somewhere in the landscape plans. For special uses, this compliance is required for public schools and community colleges where there's 500 square feet or newly constructed landscape projects, or 1,200 square feet of rehabilitated landscape projects, as well as healthcare facilities.
All right. So, thank you, Esteban. From this division, which is division 4, I would continue the rest of the presentation. This division is about the material conservation and resource efficiency. Just a couple of quick notes here. All penetration need to be sealed with a cementitious material or metal and not foam, and having a weather-resistant exterior wall and foundation. Regarding moisture control, also use sprinklers which don't spray the buildings is required. For opening and entrance, use water resistance material and non-absorbent flooring within 2 feet around the each opening is mandatory. And for non-residential buildings, any regular entry like an employee entrance, but not an emergency exit or something like that, need to have either a 4-foot deep overhang for the compliance. Okay, so under construction waste reduction, it should be up to 60%, and of course, it exclude the hazardous waste. Excavated soil and land clearing debris also must be um, diverted fully. So you can do either source separation on site, or you can have it sorted off site, but provided with the documentation and reduce volume option. For addition and alternation, you've got to be able to track how like household hazardous waste and land clearing debris, which need to go right into the compost. Okay, so we reached to the embodied carbon, which is completely new in this version of Calgary. As we know, from July 1st, 2024, the embodied carbon is required as a part of CALGreen. So, to address embodied carbon on non residential projects over 100,000 square feet or more, or schools like 50,000 square feet or more, this will reduce on January 1st, 2026 to 50,000 square feet for all non-residential projects, and there are three pathways to compliance. So today we will talk to you about each of these. It is building reuse life cycle analysis and the prescriptive path. To understand each option, we need to know what embodied carbon is, where embodied carbon show up in the construction process, and the scope of actually for looking at each those pathway. All right. So, what is embodied carbon? Embodied carbon refers to greenhouse gas emissions or rising from manufacturing, transportation, installation, maintenance, and disposal of building materials. We don't want to get this confused with operational carbon, which is related to greenhouse gas emissions due to building energy consumption after use part. Um, that's probably the carbon emission you are most used to hearing about. So, focusing on embodied, you may have seen this chart, um, the image. Um, so, here we will find the carbon in the construction process. This cradle to gator scope looks at product stage, which we call it A1 to A3, as you can see in the chart. And this is the scope you will look at for the prescriptive pathway. The next is the cradle to grave. This is include the product stage, but also construction, use, and end of life stages. Um, so we can call it from A1 to C4. This is the scope include the whole building life cycle assessment, and the last is cradle to cradle, which include the whole cradle to grave scope, but additionally include things beyond the building life cycle. All right. So here a little more detail overview. We have our building reuse option for additions, where the addition is less than two times the area of the existing building. The mandatory measures require 45% of the structure and enclosure to be reused. Next will be the whole building life cycle analysis. This is the modeling pathway where you will need to show a 10% in embodied carbon from a baseline building. And the last is the prescriptive pathway, which targets carbon reduction in a specific materials. For the mandatory measures, this limits the global warming potential to 175% of the industry-wide average from EPD. All right. Here we are going to dig into each of those. So the first option, as I mentioned, is a reuse for an existing building. Again, this method is for additions or alternation, where the addition is less than two times the area of the existing building. This method targets primary structural elements and building enclosure material, and you're excluding hazardous material as well as window and insulation, and that's to encourage replacing windows and insulation with high performance material. The second path is the whole building life cycle assessment. So to use this one, you need to build a model like an energy model, but instead of energy usage, you are measuring embodied carbon. So this is looking over a reference study period of 60 years, and you're looking at the same material as the building reuse method. Except this time you are including the glazing material and insulation. And the last one for embodied carbon is the prescriptive path. This method has a much more limited scope, targeting some higher impact material determined by the by Clean California program, like certain type of steel, glass, insulation, and of course, concrete. So this table here shows the maximum acceptable global warming potential value for each of those. Well, as we already reached to the end of the time, I have to speak a little bit faster here. We finish up the carbon part with the voluntary measures here. So as you can see here, it is divided by A4 as residential and A5 as non-residential. It's kind of like, again, lead checklist where you are adding into tier 1 some mandatory measures, and then you need to pick a certain number of elective within each category. And then tier 2 is similar process, just a little bit more. So it tells you highlight to energy threshold. You need to be 5 or 10% better in like lighting. Power density needs to be better, outdoor lighting needs to be better, and so on. So it will be similar for non-residential as well. And then I just wanted to here mention about the um, a new actually section to this cycle of CALGreen, which is added a bird-friendly building design as an elective measure under the tier 1 and tier 2. So the idea is to look at this as the best practice going forward, so that 90% of the building elevation has bird-friendly mitigation strategies. Uh, all right. So for the environmental quality, again, I would ask Esteban to continue with the rest of the presentation.
Yes. Last but not least, environmental quality. So, very, very briefly for this section, you cannot have open combustion for fireplaces. If that's the case, um, mechanical ventilation also requires uh, MERV 8 air filters for 30% of the design. Permanent HVAC system required uh, MERV MERV 13 for the ducts, and they need to be like covered in tape or plastic during construction to uh, avoid contamination. The focus here is having the ducts be delivered on site with end caps, so they're not getting construction dust. Uh, and once they are installed, uh, you you just like can flush them without having any additional construction pollution. Also, materials under CalGreen require demonstrating compliance with industry standards. Smoking also must be labeled as prohibited within 25 feet linear feet of the building entries, and Make sure that your construction site is equipped with vapor retarder installed over gravel for capillary break, and that needs to be thick enough and taped off. Also, make sure in your bathroom fans are Energy Star certified, and fans must also be controlled by a humidistat on wall or in unit for 50 to 80% relative humidity, unless you have whole house ventilation. You also need to include your heating and AC systems, all the details there, and calculations in the drawings to show compliance with the energy code. And then for outdoor air delivery monitoring, uh, carbon dioxide uh, are required for non-residential projects. And that's basically it. A lot of content there, but happy to continue the conversation here for any questions that you may have.
All right, thank you all. We are in the end of the session. Once again, thank you for joining us today. And don't forget that if you have any other question or need help with your project, you can always reach out to us. Also, you can scan the QR code here. So, we have a question here. How can I get help with the compliance? Uh, you can always reach out to our customer success and sales team via email and send your request. So they would contact you and we will set a meeting with you to understand your needs and completely walk you through the process. And then we can help you to get a compliance with the CALGreen. Um, all right, so as we are at the end of the time, actually 7 minutes passed from the end of the time, we will say goodbye to you and please feel free to ask any other question that you have via our live chat or reaching out via email to us. Have a very good day all. Bye.